Elias lived in the kind of old Victorian house where the wood groaned less from age and more from perpetual complaint. He was a creature of habit, and his nights were defined by a comfortable auditory landscape, the metallic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the distant sigh of traffic on the main road, and the gentle, constant susurrus of the refrigerator down in the kitchen. Then came the silence. It started subtly, always around 3:17 a.m. Elias was a light sleeper, and the initial disturbance wasn't a noise, but a sudden, localized void. He would wake, not with a start, but with a deep, chilling conviction that something essential had stopped. The silence was strictly confined to the third-floor landing, where the abandoned nursery sat. Every morning, he would check. The clock downstairs was ticking. The fridge was humming. But when he opened the door to the staircase leading up to the third floor, he met a wall of perfect, absolute soundlessness. It was heavier than any sound, a vacuum that pressed against his eardrums. The worst part was the light. At night, a sliver of weak moonlight always passed through the dusty landing window. But when the silence arrived, the light seemed to change its mind about existing there. The moonlight was present on the floorboards leading up the stairs, but the moment the wood crossed the threshold of the third-floor landing, the light simply failed to penetrate. It was as if the silence consumed luminescence, too. On the fifth night, Elias couldn't bear the unknown. He grabbed the thick brass flashlight from the drawer, its beam a reassuring, solid yellow, and slowly climbed the first 2 flights. As his head broke the plane of the third-floor landing, the familiar world dissolved. The flashlight beam, which had been crisp and defined, became milky and indistinct. It was like shining a light through water. And the silence, it was overwhelming now, erasing the sound of his own breathing. He could feel his heartbeat, a desperate, frantic drumming, but he couldn't hear it. He stepped onto the landing. The air was frigid, tasting metallic and burnt. His eyes were drawn to the nursery door. Unlike the other doors up here, which were firmly shut, this one was always cracked open just enough to reveal a vertical slash of deep, impenetrable blackness. He raised the flashlight, intending to push the door open, but his hand froze. In the corner of his vision, in the deepest shadow near the window, he saw an indentation in the darkness. Not a shape, but a lack of shadow, a space where the blackness itself seemed slightly thinner, stretched taut like thin cellophane. He blinked, turning his head fully to face it. It was gone. Of course it was gone. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the nursery door. He heard the faint scrape of leather on wood, his own shoe, and the sound was alien, too loud, instantly swallowed by the encroaching vacuum. He stood before the nursery and forced his eyes to penetrate the black vertical slice. He saw nothing but the complete, velvety absence of light. But as he stood there, his mind, desperate for context, provided one terrifying detail. He was seeing the sliver of blackness, the crack in the door, but he was no longer seeing the outline of the doorframe itself. The familiar, chipped white paint of the frame was gone. It had been replaced by something else, something that held the shadow in place. It was a delicate, impossibly thin, pale grey line, like an etching, that ran along the edge of the darkness. It curved at the top, perfectly, without a joint or break, and it was moving. Very slowly. The line wasn't the edge of a door. It was the outline of a mouth, barely parted, drawn in bone-white ink against the suffocating dark. The silence suddenly shifted. It didn't lift, it deepened. And Elias understood, with a certainty that erased all past logic, that the silence was not what was in the room. The silence was what happened when something was removed from the world. He felt the metallic taste of the cold air sharpen in his throat, and the next beat of his heart was so faint, so easily absorbed, he wasn't sure he truly made it. He realized he was standing still, not breathing, offering up the last of his noise to the curator waiting behind the thin, moving grey line. He stood on the landing, perfectly silent, waiting for the mouth to open just wide enough to fit the tick of a clock, the whoosh of a breath, or the scrape of a shoe. He knew, with absolute dread, that the outline had stopped moving, and that he was the only thing left to define the edges of the room.